Every single day this war continues, more than $1 billion disappears. Not in stock market crashes, not in government stimulus, but in missiles, interceptors, fighter jets, destroyed infrastructure, and economic shutdowns. A missile that costs $50,000 gets launched. A defense system fires an interceptor worth $400,000 to stop it. A fighter jet takes off, burning tens of thousands of dollars in fuel every hour. And somewhere in the background, entire economies start feeling the pressure. Because modern wars are not just fought with weapons anymore, they're fought with budgets. And the biggest question right now isn't just who is winning militarily. The real question is, who can afford to keep fighting longer? Because when the numbers are added up, this war is quietly becoming one of the most expensive regional conflicts in modern history. When most people think about war, they imagine soldiers, tanks, explosions. But behind every missile launch, there is a massive economic machine. Every interceptor missile fired by Israel's Iron Dome system costs roughly $40,000 to $50,000. And during intense rocket barrages, hundreds of these interceptors can be launched in a single night. Which means just defending the sky for a few hours can cost millions of dollars. But that's only the beginning. Because the Iron Dome itself isn't cheap. A single battery, including radar systems, launchers, and command units, costs between $50 million and $100 million. Israel currently operates roughly 10 batteries across the country to protect its cities. That alone represents around $1 billion in defense infrastructure. And every time rockets are launched toward Israeli cities, those systems activate. Radar scans the sky, algorithms calculate impact zones, and interceptor missiles launch within seconds. Each interception quietly adds another $50,000 line item to the war bill. Missile defense is incredibly advanced, but economically, it creates a strange imbalance. Because in many cases, defense is more expensive than attack. For example, many rockets used in regional conflicts cost only a few $1,000s to produce. Even more advanced missiles used by Iran are often estimated around $300,000 to $500,000 each. Now compare that to the cost of maintaining radar networks, interceptor missiles, air defense command systems, military personnel, and constant operational readiness. Suddenly, stopping the attack becomes far more expensive than launching it. Military strategists call this the cost-exchange ratio, and in missile warfare, the attacker often has the advantage, because they can launch cheap weapons in large numbers, while the defender must spend heavily to stop each one. Now let's look at the numbers. Military analysts estimate that Israel's wartime spending, including Air Force operations, missile defense, troop mobilization, logistics, and weapons systems, can reach $700 to $800 million per day during intense conflict periods. But military spending isn't the only cost. Wars also disrupt economies. Airspace closures reduce tourism, businesses slow down, factories pause production, investors pull back. According to economic estimates, the broader impact of war disruptions on Israel's economy can reach $2.9 billion per week. That's roughly $400 million per day in economic losses. Combine military spending with economic disruption, and the total cost of war for Israel can exceed $1.1 billion every single day. To put that in perspective, that's more than the annual budget of some small nations, disappearing daily. The United States also plays a critical role in the financial side of this conflict. American forces maintain military bases across the Middle East. When tensions escalate, those bases activate missile defense systems, surveillance networks, and rapid response forces. Systems like Patriot and THAAD are deployed to protect these facilities, and these systems are extremely expensive. A single Patriot battery can cost around $1 billion. THAAD systems can reach $2 to $3 billion per battery. Operating them during wartime, with radar scanning and interceptors ready, adds millions in operational costs daily. During the early stages of the conflict, analysts estimated that the United States spent several billion dollars within just a few days on regional military operations, which means the financial burden of this war extends far beyond the immediate battlefield. Now let's look at the other side. Iran's military strategy relies heavily on asymmetric warfare. Instead of maintaining large, expensive air forces flying daily missions, Iran often uses ballistic missiles and drones. One example frequently discussed is the Shahed 136 drone. These drones can cost between $20,000 and $50,000 each. Compared to modern fighter jets or cruise missiles, that's extremely cheap. Ballistic missiles launched by Iran vary in price, but many estimates place them between $250,000 and $1 million per missile. Even at the higher end, these weapons remain significantly cheaper than the defensive systems used to intercept them. This allows Iran to apply financial pressure through volume. By launching multiple missiles and drones at once, they increase the cost of defense for their opponent. So when economists compare the financial impact of this war, the numbers look something like this. Israel, roughly $1.1 billion per day. Iran, approximately $400 to $500 million per day, including missile launches and economic disruption. At first glance, Israel appears to be spending far more, but raw spending doesn't always tell the full story, because the economic capacity of each country matters. Israel's economy is roughly $500 billion in GDP. Iran's economy is smaller and operates under heavy sanctions, which means each dollar spent affects the two countries very differently. And this leads to the most important strategic question of the war. Who can sustain the cost longer? Wars rarely end simply because one side runs out of weapons. More often, they end when one side can no longer afford to continue. History has shown this repeatedly, from the Cold War to the Soviet War in Afghanistan, to long conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. The economic strain of prolonged conflict can slowly erode a nation's ability to keep fighting. And in this conflict, both sides face different pressures. For Israel, the risk is economic slowdown and prolonged military spending. For Iran, the risk is infrastructure damage and reduced oil revenue. Each side is trying to apply pressure where the other is weakest. But the financial impact doesn't stop with these two countries. Global markets also feel the shock. When tensions rise in the Middle East, energy traders watch closely because the region supplies a significant portion of the world's oil. Even small disruptions can push oil prices higher. Shipping routes become riskier, insurance costs rise. Energy markets react almost instantly. And every spike in oil prices affects transportation, manufacturing, electricity generation, and inflation around the world. Which means a regional conflict can quietly influence the entire global economy. At this point, one thing becomes clear. This war isn't just about territory or politics, it's about economic endurance. Every missile launched, every interceptor fired, every airstrike conducted adds another line to a growing financial ledger. And that ledger is now reaching billions of dollars every week. The longer the war continues, the more pressure builds, not just on the battlefield, but on budgets, economies, and financial stability. Because in the end, The side that wins may not simply be the one with the strongest army. It may be the one that can afford to keep fighting the longest. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives like this.